The Trap of Intelligence. Today, we are about to hear a story that might change the way you think. This is the story of a young man named Jack. Jack was a smart and hardworking guy who always topped his class. He believed that if he studied hard and gathered as much knowledge from books as possible, he could solve any problem. But one day, something happened that turned his world upside down. Jack believed that intelligence was the greatest strength. He thought his smarts could get him out of any problem. But as he grew older, he realized that true success in real life doesn't come solely from books. This realization hit him when he scored well on an important exam, but a small mistake cost him the big job he was aiming for. Jack's story might resonate with you, too, because at some point, we've all believed that our intelligence would lead us in the right direction. But does it always? The author of the book, David Robson, tells us that our minds and thoughts can sometimes lead us astray. We think that intelligence will help us make the right decisions, but at times, it can work against us. This is the intelligence trap, the trap of being too smart for our own good. Is greater intelligence always helpful? This book raises the question, does having more intelligence always lead to better decisions? Does a high IQ mean we can face any challenge? According to Robson, the answer is no. We need to understand that intelligence is not just about what we read or know, but rather, it's about using that knowledge in the right way. Jack regretted his mistake, but it also taught him a valuable lesson that relying solely on his intelligence doesn't guarantee the right decision every time. Intelligence can help guide us in the right direction, but we need to use our minds with an open perspective. Robson suggests that we adopt critical thinking. When we bring flexibility into our thinking and consider things from various perspectives, we make better decisions. Mistakes and their causes. In his book, Robson includes significant research that shows how we often make wrong choices because of our intelligence. In one study, a group was asked to think about their financial decisions. Those who were more intelligent struggled to recognize their mistakes. As a result, they repeated their past errors. This shows that when we become overconfident in our intelligence, we aren't always immune to making mistakes. Jack's mistake and the lesson learned. When Jack realized his mistake, he asked himself a question: I've studied so much, so why did I make this mistake? This is a question we should all ask ourselves. Are we using our intelligence in the right way? Do we stick rigidly to our own opinions, or do we try to understand other perspectives? Jack learned that if we approach our thinking with humility, we can learn from our mistakes. Robson also suggests practicing intellectual humility, meaning that we acknowledge that we don't know everything and that there's always something we can learn from others. Jack did the same. He brought flexibility into his thinking and tried to recognize his mistakes, which helped him become a better person. As he came to understand that intelligence alone couldn't always guide him in the right direction, he worked to free himself from the intelligence trap. Mental misunderstandings and our thinking. Jack learned a lot from his mistake, but this was only his first step. He now needed to understand that his mistake wasn't just a minor lapse, it was part of a deeper mental trap that many of us fall into. This is the trap of mental misunderstandings and cognitive biases. This is where intelligence can sometimes deceive us. We all know that intelligence can help solve many problems, but sometimes our minds lead us in the wrong direction. Have you ever noticed that the more we think, the more we sometimes amplify our mistakes? This is what happens with cognitive biases or mental predispositions. David Robson's book delves into these topics and explains how our intelligence can sometimes be our greatest obstacle. The incident with Jack highlighted another crucial point: how often confirmation bias sneaks into our thinking. This means we tend to seek information that confirms our pre-existing opinions. In Jack's case, this bias was evident. He focused only on aspects that aligned with his beliefs and disregarded everything else. Confirmation bias and its impact. Sometimes we train our minds to favor information that matches our existing beliefs. For example, if someone believes that people always lie, they will look at new information with that mindset and try to prove it true. Jack did the same. He was moving in a direction led by his own thinking and intelligence, which seemed safe to him, even if it was wrong. Cognitive dissonance. Another interesting aspect in Jack's case was cognitive dissonance, a mental state where we feel a conflict between our beliefs and our actions. When our mind believes one thing and we do another, it creates a sense of imbalance. This imbalance makes us uncomfortable, and we want to resolve the contradiction at any cost. After losing his job, Jack realized he had to confront his mistake, but he initially clung to the belief that he was right. Later, he felt a mental conflict as he tried to justify his mistake. This was when Jack truly experienced cognitive dissonance. Robson's book highlights an important point. When we don't acknowledge our mistakes, we're likely to make even worse decisions. Jack had to accept his error, and only then could he move on. He then attempted to reshape his thinking and understand why he had become so overconfident. The role of overconfidence. Jack's next thought was whether overconfidence had caused him to ignore his mistakes. Robson tells us that our minds are not always right, especially when we're overly confident in our knowledge and understanding. Overconfidence often leads us toward poor decisions. For example, imagine someone who is an excellent chess player and thinks they can win every game. If they try a new strategy that contradicts their past experiences, they might avoid it because they trust their old methods so much they dismiss new approaches. This is the effect of overconfidence, when we are so confident in our knowledge and understanding that we reject new perspectives. A time for wisdom. Jack realized he was trapped in a web of overconfidence, which was steering his thoughts in the wrong direction. He decided to keep his mind more open. Instead of relying solely on books and theoretical knowledge, he began to learn from others. He understood that making the right decision requires open-mindedness. Now, Jack had a fresh outlook. He knew that trusting only his intelligence wasn't enough. He needed flexibility and openness to others' ideas. This change made him wiser. The impact of faulty thinking. So far, Jack had learned how his overconfidence and mental biases were leading him astray, but he still had more to learn. He needed to understand that our thinking often includes errors that complicate our decision-making. These mistakes in our thinking are known as thinking errors. Jack's life changed when he realized that our minds make many small errors that we are unaware of. He began to notice that every time he made a decision, he needed to question whether his thinking might be leading him in the wrong direction, as these mistakes also weakened his intelligence. Thinking errors, the small mistakes we don't see. A key aspect of Jack's story is how he started focusing on thinking errors, those unnoticed patterns of thought that direct us unwittingly. The mental traps that lead our minds down paths where we often make wrong decisions. For example, imagine you're trying to solve a problem and you have plenty of information, yet you still use that information in the wrong way. This is an example of thinking incorrectly, and the mistake grows even worse when we have mental biases. For example, Jack made a mistake where it took him time to realize that he was overgeneralizing, taking one event or example and making a general assumption about everything. For instance, if someone fails at their job, it doesn't mean that everyone will fail at their job. Jack was also making this mistake, connecting one situation to the rest of his life and trying to understand the entire thing incorrectly. Mental models, a new way of thinking. When Jack realized this, he started thinking about mental models. Mental models refer to ways of thinking that train our minds to think in the right direction. These are a set of thoughts and principles that we apply to solve problems. Jack learned that he only needed to think differently in his mind. For instance, Jack thought about the mental model called Occam's razor, which says that when a problem arises, the simplest and most straightforward solution is usually the right one. Jack realized that the more he complicated his thoughts, the more he would move toward wrong decisions. This principle could help him make his life's decisions simpler and more accurate. Heuristic thinking, the problem with quick decisions. Jack also paid attention to heuristic thinking, which involves making decisions quickly with limited information. This is a kind of shortcut, but it can sometimes be wrong. Jack realized that when he tried to make decisions hastily without thinking things through, it clouded his judgment. Take another example. If someone is buying a new product and decides it's good just because it's on sale, that's an example of heuristic thinking. However, they aren't considering the quality of the product or their needs, but just basing their decision on the price. This was the mistake Jack recognized, and now he was working on making his thinking more rational. Overconfidence bias and its effect. Now, Jack had no trouble realizing that his overconfidence was the biggest cause of his intelligence trap. Often, we become so overconfident that we don't realize how big the mistakes in our thinking can be. This is discussed in depth in David Robson's book, and Jack understood that in order to use his intelligence correctly, he needed to constantly challenge his thinking. Confirmation bias, the deception. Jack noticed that we often strengthen our thoughts by only accepting those ideas that align with our pre-existing beliefs. This is called confirmation bias. Jack realized how dangerous this can be because when we only listen to what fits with what we think is right, we narrow our thinking even further. For example, let's say you're in a relationship and you believe the other person is just like you. You only hear things that confirm what you think, but ignore other aspects of that person. This is confirmation bias. Jack learned that we need to understand our thinking with an open mind and realize that what seems right isn't always right. How to recognize wrong thinking, the path to better decision making. As you know, Jack was now trying to identify the mistakes in his thinking. He understood that intelligence isn't just about knowing facts, it's about how we use that knowledge properly. Jack now had a burning question: how could he make his decisions better? Does he just need more information or something else? The answer was quite interesting. In David Robson's book, The Intelligence Trap, it is mentioned that the mistakes we make in decision-making are directly related to the depth of our thinking and overconfidence. Jack realized that in order to make the right decision, we need to make our thinking more open-minded, flexible, and adaptable. The role of emotions in decision-making. Feelings and decisions. Jack realized that our thinking cannot be limited to just reasoning and information. Our emotions and feelings also affect our decisions. If we let our emotions take over a decision, it is often not the right one. This was the reason why, at times, Jack had made emotionally driven decisions that later turned out to be wrong. For example, one day Jack decided to work on a project with his favorite colleague because he had a good experience with that person and liked him. But when the results came in, he realized that the colleague wasn't as suited for the task as Jack had thought. From this experience, Jack learned that we should not let our emotions and personal preferences influence our decisions. Cognitive bias and its impact on thinking errors. Jack now understood that cognitive bias, or mental preconception, occurs when we start viewing something from one particular perspective, making it difficult for our minds to accept other viewpoints. This is why people often make wrong decisions because of their biases. Jack also learned about anchoring bias, a state where we make decisions based on previous choices or information, which limits our thinking. For instance, imagine you are thinking of buying a new car. You have already decided based on price or features. But when you see another car that is much better, your mind still clings to the first choice and you ignore the better option. This is what happens with anchoring bias. It restricts our thinking. Breaking the circle, how to expand our thinking. Jack now understood that analytical thinking alone cannot lead to good decisions. To direct his decisions in the right direction, he needed to open up his thinking. He realized that he had to expand his thinking. Jack began to look at his decisions from different perspectives. For example, when he was considering a new business idea, he used to only look at it from the strengths and weaknesses angle. But now, he also considered the market needs, competition, and future direction. Systematic decision-making, a new way of deciding. Jack learned that to make decisions, we need to adopt systematic methods. Systematic decision-making means thinking carefully and considering all aspects before making a decision. For example, when Jack thought about a large investment, he looked at various factors before deciding. He considered the budget, risks, and potential profits before making the final decision. This method made Jack's thinking more organized and structured. Uncertainty and risk, the role in decision-making. Another important lesson Jack learned was about thinking through uncertainty and risk. Often, uncertainty and risk are overlooked, but they have a huge impact on our decisions. Jack understood that we shouldn't always view a situation based on predetermined outcomes. Before making decisions, we should think about the potential risks and uncertainties. For example, if you're thinking of investing in a business, you should consider what would happen if the investment doesn't go as planned. Do you have enough resources to recover from that situation? This kind of thinking process helped Jack improve his mental models. The new world of thinking. Jack now understood that to make the right decisions, knowledge is crucial, but simply having information doesn't make a difference. What's most important is understanding that information correctly and acting on it. In this direction, he began using mental models to strengthen his thinking. What are mental models? You may have heard of the term mental models before, but did you know that they play a role not just in books, but also in our daily decisions? Mental models are essentially the reasoning and ways of thinking that help us understand problems and make decisions correctly. These models guide our thinking and show us the right path in complex situations. A great example of this is the two-box method. Jack thought about mental models and adopted an approach he called the two-box method. In this technique, Jack decided to think about every new problem by placing it into two boxes, the what box and the how box. In the first box, he looks at what the problem is, meaning the what. He asks himself what the root of the problem is. In the second box, he thinks about how the problem can be solved, meaning the how. For example, let's say Jack wants to start a new business. In the first box, he thinks about what the business is about, what product or service will be offered, and how will it be marketed. Then, in the second box, he thinks about how the business will operate, whether he will need investment to start it, and how to reach customers. This method gave Jack the ability to view any problem or decision from different angles. It helped him make clearer, more informed decisions. The power of first principles thinking. Much like how Einstein thought, Jack adopted another mental model, which he read about, first principles thinking. This method was so effective that great thinkers like Elon Musk used it as well. First principles mean looking at a problem or situation from the most basic level, without any assumptions. Jack understood this and applied it to his life. Now, whenever he faces a complex problem, he tries to identify the fundamental components of the problem. This is the magic of first principles thinking. For example, if Jack needs to create a new product for his business, he doesn't first think about why this new product can't be like existing products. Instead, he starts thinking about what the basic purpose of the product is or whether its fundamental need can be fulfilled. This way, he begins his thinking without any preconceived biases and looks for ways to arrive at new ideas. Applying mental models to life problems. Jack gradually understood that mental models could help not only with big decisions, but also with everyday life. He began applying them to both his personal and professional life. For example, when Jack engages in a conversation, he no longer thinks about it with just his own ego. He thinks about the mental state of the other person and how their mental models might affect the conversation. Whenever he encounters conflict, he tries to understand how the other person is thinking. He asks himself whether there is any bias in their thinking that is affecting their decisions and whether he is understanding their point of view. Cognitive dissonance and our mistakes. Jack also worked on another important mental model, cognitive dissonance. This occurs when we believe something, but our reality does not match that belief. During cognitive dissonance, we either try to change our reality or use reasoning to prove our beliefs right. For example, Jack noticed that when people believe something wrong, they try to justify it with all kinds of arguments. For instance, if someone believes that money is the only source of happiness, they ignore everything that challenges this belief and consider those who view money as the ultimate source of happiness as right. Mental models for future decisions improvement. The more Jack learned about mental models, the more he understood his thinking. He started thinking about applying mental models not only in his life, but also in future decisions. Jack also learned about decision fatigue. When we have to make continuous decisions, our thinking becomes weak. He found a way to solve this by adopting some habits and processes to simplify his decisions so he wouldn't have to think too much about everyday, small decisions. Biases and mental mistakes. Jack had learned a lot, but there was one more thing he needed to pay attention to: biases. These mental mistakes are very subtle and precise, but they can have a deep impact on our thinking and decisions. Jack understood that simply applying mental models isn't enough. He also needed to understand biases to refine his thinking even further. What is bias? Bias refers to mental shortcuts that lead us to make conclusions about something or someone without a solid foundation. Often, we draw conclusions based on preconceived notions or assumptions about a person or event, which can be wrong. These biases distort our thinking, preventing us from making the right decisions. Confirmation bias, trying to justify our wrong decisions. Jack was the first to understand confirmation bias. This is the mistake most people make. Once we believe something, we only seek information that supports our belief. For example, Jack once believed that people always needed money, so he began searching for examples that supported this belief, ignoring those that contradicted it. This is confirmation bias, seeking only the information that justifies our beliefs. After recognizing this, Jack decided to keep an open mind, critically evaluating new ideas and information instead of just trying to validate his old beliefs. Anchoring bias, sticking to first impressions. Jack also reflected on anchoring bias, which occurs when we stick to our first impression or the first piece of information we receive and use it as a reference for everything else. For example, if Jack was shown an expensive car first and then saw cheaper ones, he might not consider the cheaper cars as good because his mindset was anchored to the first expensive car. This was anchoring bias, evaluating everything based on the first piece of information. Jack learned that he should always view new information from a fresh perspective, without any preconceived notions. The halo effect, associating one quality with the entire personality. Next, Jack thought about the halo effect, which is a bias where we associate one good quality of a person or thing with their entire personality or value. For example, if Jack thought a CEO was attractive and impressive, he might assume that every decision or idea from that CEO was also correct, even if it wasn't. This is the halo effect, one positive trait leading to an overall positive assumption. Jack realized that it was essential to recognize this bias and not make conclusions about a person or organization without full information. Framing effect, how the way a question is asked can affect our decision. Jack also learned about the framing effect, which happens when information is presented in a way that influences our thinking. For example, if Jack were asked, "Would you choose a treatment with an 80% success rate?" he would likely say yes. But if the same treatment were framed as, "Would you choose a treatment with a 20% failure rate?" Jack might hesitate, even though both questions convey the same information. The framing effect made Jack realize that before making any decision, he should focus on understanding the information thoroughly and avoid being overly influenced by how it is presented. Overconfidence bias, not recognizing our mistakes. Overconfidence bias happens when we become too sure of our abilities. This is especially common when we feel competent in something and then become overconfident about our decisions. For instance, Jack observed that many people who were successful in business became overly confident in their future decisions, even if they were new to them. Jack understood that humility, self-awareness, and the ability to learn from mistakes were crucial to maintaining balance in his thinking and making better decisions. The true strength of intelligence, learning from mistakes. By now, Jack had learned a lot. He had become skilled at recognizing the mistakes he used to overlook. He realized that true intelligence comes not just from IQ, but from the ability to learn from mistakes and adapt. Being high doesn't necessarily make someone wise. In fact, the true power of intelligence lies in how we learn from our mistakes, how we reflect on them, and how we grow from them. Mistakes can show us the right path. Jack now understood that, in reality, our mistakes teach us the most valuable lessons. Many people are afraid of their mistakes and try to hide them, but true wisdom lies in accepting our failures and learning something new from them. This is true intelligence. Jack thought about a famous example. Do you know that Thomas Edison, whose inventions changed the world, had to go through almost 1,000 unsuccessful experiments in his life? But he never considered his failures as defeat. He once said, "I have not failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that won't work." Jack found this example very inspiring and decided that, instead of fearing his mistakes, he would analyze them and use them as stepping stones for his growth. Deliberate practice. Jack learned the importance of deliberate practice. No matter how smart you are, if you don't work hard to improve your skills, you won't reach your full potential. Jack realized that intelligence is not just an innate quality, it's a skill that can be continuously improved. If you want to get good at something, you need to put in deliberate effort. This doesn't mean just spending time, it means making your efforts purposeful, organized, and focused. Jack understood through another example how real effort and practice must be deliberate, conscious, and focused. Once, basketball legend Michael Jordan said, "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost almost 300 games. 26 times, I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." This was the mindset Jack had to adopt. Self-awareness. Jack learned an important lesson: self-awareness. No matter how smart you are, if you don't understand your thoughts and emotions, you can't make the best use of your intelligence. Self-awareness means understanding your thoughts, recognizing your emotions, and paying attention to your decision-making process. Jack learned that if you want to understand your thoughts better, you need to increase your mindfulness. This meant that he would spend time every day reflecting and thinking about his thoughts, decisions, and the outcomes of those decisions. Jack thought about an example. When we are in a difficult situation, we often make quick decisions. But are these decisions always right? Just think, if we were given time, could we not make better decisions? That's what self-awareness is, controlling our thoughts. The importance of humility. Jack also learned the importance of humility from this book. Many people think they have it all figured out, but in reality, this mindset leads us to blind spots. If we think we know everything, we can't even recognize our mistakes. Jack decided that he would remain humble and continue his learning process. He would always keep an open mind and be ready to understand any new information. True meaning of intelligence. In the end, Jack understood that the true meaning of intelligence is not just having a sharp mind, but learning from our mistakes, improving our thinking, and continuously working on our personal growth. Jack now knew that intelligence is not just a trait, but a journey where we are constantly learning, reflecting, and improving. And this is the real wisdom. So, friends, today's book summary ends here. Jack's journey ends here, but his growth and learning journey will always continue. This book teaches us that we should never stop improving our thoughts and understanding. If we try to correct our mistakes while understanding them, we can excel in any field. If we could succeed, then friends, today's audiobook ends here. We hope that you have learned a lot from it and will surely apply it in your life. Next time, we will be back with a new and inspiring video that will give you even more motivation and clarity. Until then, take care of yourself, think positively, and keep moving towards the goals of your life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, ListenUp Audiobooks, so you don't miss any new updates. See you soon. Until then, keep moving forward.